Let them construct a sanctuary for me, that I may dwell among them. These were God's words to Moses, expressing his desire for a house to be built for him on earth, in which he might dwell among his people. Quite some time has passed since God first introduced Jacob to some of the principles of his house at Bethel. The reason for this was that God could not establish his house on earth until he had a people set apart for himself to worship and to serve in that house. And Israel was to be that people. God appeared to Moses on Mount Sinai and said to him, "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you shall speak to the sons of Israel." 3 important steps were necessary before Israel could be called the people of God and before God could dwell among them. The first was that Israel had to be brought out of slavery in Egypt, or redeemed. You'll remember how that God inflicted 10 plagues on Egypt, and time after time Pharaoh's heart was hardened and he refused to let the Israelites out of slavery. That was until the 10th plague, when God passed through Egypt and every firstborn male in the land was struck down. The Israelites had been commanded by God to paint the tops and the sides of their door frames with the blood of a lamb. And that night, when God went through Egypt, he passed over the houses where he saw the blood, so that the plague on the firstborn did not affect the Israelites. The Egyptians were struck with fear, and they urged the Israelites to leave their land at once. And so, Israel was redeemed from slavery by the blood of the Passover lambs. The wonder of this event is recorded by the writer of the Chronicles, who says, "And what one nation in the earth is like your people Israel, whom God went to redeem for himself as a people." Next, you remember how that the Israelites arrived at the Red Sea, pursued by the Egyptian forces. Pharaoh had once again changed his mind about freeing Israel, but God had other plans. Moses was commanded to stretch out his hand over the waters, and God parted the waters of the Red Sea so that the Israelites could pass right through the middle on dry ground, a wall of water on their right and a wall of water on their left. In the New Testament, we discover that what Israel experienced on that occasion is a picture of believers' baptism. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 2 says that all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. This was the second step. Finally, the people of Israel came to Mount Sinai in the wilderness. It was on that mountain that God gave Moses his law for his people, which would affect every aspect of their lives. Moses came down from the mountain and recounted to the people everything that God had said to him. And the response of the people was emphatic. They said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient." Moses had taken the blood of the sacrifices that were being prepared by the young men of Israel, and he sprinkled it first on the book of the covenant, in which he'd written all the words of God. Then he sprinkled the blood on the people, and so the people became, by the blood of the covenant, a people for God's own possession. They became the people of the book because they'd pledged their obedience to do all that God had commanded of them. It was then, and only then, that God communicated his desire for them to build a sanctuary for him to dwell in among them. Before that was possible, these 3 conditions had been fulfilled. Israel had been redeemed by blood, baptized in water, and had promised to be obedient to all that God had commanded them. These requirements are exactly the same today if God is to dwell amongst a covenant people, a people of his very own. We'll return to examine these things in more detail in one of our later sessions. But having fulfilled these requirements, the people of Israel could commence the work of construction. In Exodus chapter 25, we see how that Moses was told to gather materials for the building of the first physical house of God, the Tabernacle. At that time, of course, the people of Israel were on the move, journeying in the wilderness. They would have lived in tents, and so God, in his amazing grace, would dwell in a tent, right in the middle of their camp. Moses raised a contribution from the people in order to accumulate materials for the construction. And so, building of the tabernacle commenced. It must have involved thousands of people and many different skills, but the finished work had to be a fitting house for Almighty God to dwell in. Of course, there was only one way that such a result was possible, And that was because God himself had issued the blueprint for the work. God had appeared to Moses on Mount Sinai and shown him the pattern for the tabernacle. He said to him, "According to all that I am going to show you, as the pattern for the tabernacle and the pattern for all its furniture, just so you shall construct it." It was absolutely crucial that the people make all things for the tabernacle according to God's pattern. As if to emphasize its importance, God repeats this instruction to Moses several times over. There really was no place for human invention or idea in the building of God's house. It was his desire, and it had to be completed his way. The reason for this becomes clearer in the New Testament. It's there we learn that the tabernacle was a copy and shadow of things which exist in heaven. That's why Moses was not permitted to alter the design in any way. It had to mirror the heavenly things. And how faithful Moses was in completing the task that he was chosen for. The people did accomplish the work of constructing the tabernacle, and what's more, they carried that work out just as God had planned. For when it was finished, we see that God was completely satisfied, and his glory filled the innermost part of the tabernacle tent, the most holy place. Everything had been done in accordance with the pattern which God had given to Moses, and so God could fulfill his desire to dwell among a people of his very own. The people of Israel would always have been conscious of their God dwelling among them. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night served as a constant reminder of that. The Jews refer to it as the Shekinah glory, which means the visible evidence of God's presence or residence. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, when writing about the privileges of Israel as God's chosen nation, describes them as having the divine glory. This was indeed a truly precious privilege. The Almighty Creator had condescended to dwell on earth, among a people of his very own, in a tent which had been designed by him, but constructed by his people. Wherever the camp of the people of Israel went as they wandered in the desert, the tabernacle of God, the house of God with all its furniture and tools, went also. No wonder Moses could say, when he reviewed all God's dealings with Israel, "For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it, as is the Lord our God, whenever we call on him?"